Hello everyone, and welcome to Cutie Pie Collective. Today we are going to be doing some needle felting. I'm going to be making a dragon. I've made this kind of dragon before, but I'm going to try and make it a little bit bigger than the others. These are the needles that you use for felting. You can sort of see that they have these little notches in them, and those are what makes the wool felt to itself. You have to pick through your wool and pick out any little bits of hay or vegetable matter, little bits of mud that might not have been washed out. You don't want those little pieces showing up in what you make. If you're doing something small, you can use one needle like this. I've done most of my projects with a single needle. As you're felting, you want to feel around and see if there's any thin spots, holes, or dimples, and then you want to take more wool and felt it into those spots. That way it becomes more solid and more even. Since I'm trying to make something a little bit bigger than usual, I'm going to end up using this nifty tool with multiple needles in it. It's 3 needles in one to help speed up the process. Now the body is sort of like a flat-bottomed egg, and I'm just felting around trying to get it into the correct shape, picking out any little bits that I didn't get in my first comb through. Sometimes you can use one of the needles to sort of help pull those little bits of vegetable matter out. Now I'm going to work on getting the legs done, the legs and feet. They are just 2 discs in the beginning, and then I felt down one side of the disc to begin making a little foot. All of this is just sort of rough shaping. It's not the final shape. You have to leave that to the end after you have the colors on and all the parts put together. We're just getting the basic shapes to work with so that we can get the body built how we want it. I'm trying to make both legs even in how I want them. You can hold 2 different pieces that you're felting on next to each other and felt them separately. As long as you don't felt them into each other, you have to be a little bit careful, but it works. Next, we're going to felt the tail of our dragon. As you can see, I laid out a sheet of wool and then rolled it up into a little log. It makes it easier to get the shape I want. After a while, you can sort of roll it in your hands and roll it around and see if there's a thin spot. Then add more wool to those areas and felt it together. You're going to want the tip of the tail to come to a point. I used my singular needle to felt the tip of the tail to make it smooth. It's easier for pinpoint accuracy. Now we're going to work on the neck in a similar process to the tail, but we're leaving both sides very open and fluffy. That way it's easy to attach the body and the head. Speaking of, let's start working on the head. In the beginning, it's just sort of an oval shape. After the base is decent, I'll add on a little nose. I just keep adding wool to build up the shape of how I want it to look, filling in any little divots or soft spots. Now we are going to attach the head to the neck. I like to add a little bit of extra wool to help make sure that they're nice and felted together, to hopefully make sure nothing will come apart later down the road. I also decided I want the base of the neck to be a little bit wider. Now we'll attach the neck to the body and felt it all together. Now I have to add the legs and tail. Needle felting is really just the art of poking something a bajillion times with a needle and trying not to poke yourself in the process. I think I only pricked myself like 2 or 3 times during this process, so I was pretty happy with myself. The body of our dragon's coming together really well. You want to take the time to go over everything, smoothing out the body and trying to hide the creases of the different body parts, adding extra wool when necessary. Now I'm going to make the arms. I kind of forgot to make them before. When you're trying to make 2 body parts and you want them to be the same, if you pull out about the same amount of wool for each one before you start felting, it's easier to make sure that they're similar in size. Next, I'm going to make this dragon 2 little ears. I'm felting on a block of high density foam. That way it gives something for my needle to poke into and the wool won't felt to it. That way I can felt thinner pieces without risking poking myself so badly. You can give a piece a few pokes and it will stay, and then you can look and see if you like how it looks, or if it's even, and then finish felting it in. Or, if you don't like it, you can pull it off. So not everything you do right from the beginning is 100% permanent, which is very nice. Now, I don't want this dragon to be just plain white. I'm going to make it blue and white. So now I'm taking some blue wool that I dyed myself in indigo, and I'm using a thin layer of it and felting it down to the white base. You can fluff it out and do a pretty thin layer, and still have it be pretty good coverage. If there are any thin spots, you can go over with more wool later and make sure no white is peeking through. The wool will naturally vary in color a little bit because of how it's dyed. So most of the time, the colors will be at least a little bit variegated, but I think it just adds to that nice natural look. Some people will have their wool prepped before they start, or buy it ready to felt, so they won't have any little bits of debris in it. I did not do that, so I had to stop multiple times throughout this process to sort of pick through the wool as I used it. None of it is carded out or fluffed out, which is something I should probably do. Maybe I'll make a video on that later, but for right now, I just have all of my wool in its more natural, dyed and dried state. As you're felting down your color layer, if you have too much wool, you can pull it off, and then finish felting in the little wispy bits. And I'm not sure why, but my camera stopped recording, so here's the end result after I got all of the colors in place. So you can see it's a two-toned dragon with blue on its face and with a white nose, and blue on its back with a white belly. I did 2 little blue lines on all of its feet to make the paws more visible. I added a Triscale to its belly because this is a gift for someone specific, so the design was made for her. But you could add different designs on the belly if you want. I've added flowers to the back before as well. They are very customizable. I used more white for the eyes and blue for the nose and mouth. I left the bottoms of the ears white because I like how that looks. Now that we have our little dragon, it's time to make some accessories. This is, again, a gift for someone specific, so I'm making this a little dragon queen. I'm going to make her a golden crown, also made with naturally dyed wool. I'm doing a light felt in the beginning just so I can sort of measure out exactly how much I need. And then I started rolling up the edges towards the middle and felt it into a little strip. And this will become her crown. It ended up being a little bit too long, but that ended up working into my design. I just overlapped the 2 ends and it became a point for the center front. And then it'll be thinner all the way around in the back of her head. I'm using a singular needle to felt in the little bumps and wispy bits, and to help me get it all felted together. It's a lot more exact when you're trying to do more detailed or specific things and you want to push the wool in certain ways. After making sure it fit correctly, I used my 3 needles again, and I really felted it down to be more flat, so it could sit correctly as a crown. I'm going to be making some wool flowers, so it'll be like a little flower brim around the front base. These are made out of wool as well, so they are feltable. I'm taking them, rolling them up, felting them together a little bit, and then felting some pink wool onto the backs of them just to try to make sure they stay together. I had not made these little flowers. These are something that my mom had bought and offered me to use. And it happened again. Goodness. But basically, I repeated that process 5 times with 3 different colors of wool and added that little bit of wool to the backs of them so they'd stay together. And I think they ended up holding up pretty well, and they look really nice. I also made some metal pins to go through the center and hold them onto my dragon's head. Now I can also do another video later on how I made the flowers more in depth if that's something people would enjoy, and how I made the little pins. I also made a silk veil because silk veils are historically accurate and they're really pretty. My mom had a little silk bag that I ripped out the side seams of and then refinished the edges with some hand stitching. I tried my best. I'm not well versed in hand sewing, but I think it ended up looking pretty nice. And on the front side, the stitches are pretty small. So it's time to get our dragon all dressed and finished. First things first, we put on her veil, and then use the crown to keep it in place. After we have that positioned how we like and covering the ears, it looks really nice. It's like exactly the right size. I'm so happy. I was worried that it would be too small, but it worked really well. So it took a little bit of extra effort to figure out how I should put the pins in. I ended up just lightly catching the outer layer of wool, and that helped to get them in easier. I also sanded down the edges of the pins, because when I cut them, the wire was too rough and didn't want to go through the wool. After I sanded them down a little bit, it was much easier to get in place. I originally thought about trying to go through the crown, but then decided that was too difficult and just stuck them into the dragon itself. The middle pin ended up being a little bit too long. It just didn't want to work correctly, so I cut it a bit shorter and thankfully it still went in. All things considered, it turned out well. Yay! We are finished. We have a cute little wool dragon, complete with accessories. You can kind of see that the pins end up sticking out of the back of the head, but that's alright. We'll just tuck down the veil a little bit and no one will know. Alright, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave any questions down in the comments and I'll see you next time.